lives destroyed, a nation driven into starvation and fear, all in the name of one man, Mao Zedong. His cult was built like a religion, and his decisions destroyed generations. This isn't just the story of a dictator. It's a chronicle of genocide masked as revolution. The historian begins the presentation of facts. Mao Zedong was born on December 26, 1893, in the village of Shaoshan, Hunan Province. His father was a wealthy peasant, strict and authoritarian, who forced his son to work in the fields and discouraged excessive studying. From a young age, Mao displayed a rebellious spirit and contempt for authority, even for his own father. This trait would stay with him throughout his life. In his teenage years, Mao received a classical education, studying Confucian texts, but he quickly came to despise traditional Chinese culture, seeing it as an obstacle to progress. Influenced by new ideas after the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, he joined a military academy and later enrolled in a teacher's college in Changsha. There, he began reading Marx, Engels, Darwin, and Nietzsche. In 1921, Mao became one of the founding members of the Chinese Communist Party. His ambitions were limitless. He didn't want to be just a party member. He wanted to reshape history. Even early in his political career, Mao understood the power of propaganda and terror. His methods did not allow for compromise, only ideological purity, control, and the physical elimination of opponents. During the 1930s, amid the civil war with the Kuomintang, Mao built the Red Army and launched the Long March, a campaign that cost tens of thousands of lives, but cemented his image as a revolutionary leader. It was during this time that he first implemented his harsh strategy of absolute control, punishing anyone who doubted his decisions. By 1949, after the communist victory in the Civil War, Mao declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. From that moment, one of the darkest eras in modern human history began. After seizing power in 1949, Mao Zedong did not rule in a traditional sense. He transformed himself into a prophet, untouchable, infallible, and ideological messiah, and he demanded absolute obedience. In 1958, Mao launched one of the most horrifying social experiments in history, the campaign known as the Great Leap Forward. Its goal was to transform China from an agrarian society into an industrial superpower within a few years. Peasants were ordered to smelt scrap metal in backyard furnaces, grow rice on rooftops, and every failure or poor harvest was covered up, to avoid disappointing the leader. The reality quickly turned catastrophic. Due to absurd quotas, the destruction of agriculture, forced collectivization, and fear of punishment, local officials lied about harvests. The government, believing in inflated numbers, took away even the last grains from starving villages. The result, between 30 and 45 million people died from man-made famine. People ate grass, tree bark, dead animals, and there were verified cases of cannibalism. This famine was not a natural disaster. It was a political experiment, carried out under Mao's command. Even after this colossal tragedy, Mao refused to take responsibility. Instead, he blamed disloyal cadres, bourgeois elements, and poor organization. He wasn't concerned with mass death, he was concerned with losing control. In 1966, Mao unleashed a new wave of terror, the Cultural Revolution. This campaign sought to cleanse China of traditions, intellectuals, religion, and anything perceived as a threat to his ideology. Millions of young people, the Red Guards, began burning books, beating teachers, destroying temples, and torturing officials. Parents feared their children. Teachers feared their students. Ancient cultural artifacts were destroyed in minutes. Any hint of criticism of Mao was punished with humiliation, torture, or death. Many took their own lives to avoid public condemnation or show trials. Mao Zedong created an atmosphere of fear that penetrated every layer of society. He didn't just rule, he controlled thoughts. By the early 1970s, Mao Zedong was old and ailing, but his cult of personality only grew stronger. In China, there was no such thing as Mao's mistakes, only misinterpretations of his brilliant ideas. His face adorned millions of posters, his quotes were memorized in schools, and his little red book became a new scripture. Mao no longer handled daily governance, but every major decision still required his approval. His inner circle, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, and later the Gang of Four, lived in constant fear. Any deviation from the chairman's line could result in political annihilation or public disgrace. In his final years, Mao suffered from multiple health issues, lung disease, heart problems, and several heart attacks. But the greatest deterioration was not physical, it was mental. He increasingly lost clarity of thought, and his decisions became more erratic. Still, no one dared to contradict him. In 1976, Mao died at the age of 82. His death did not bring real mourning, it brought silence. The nation was exhausted after decades of terror, famine, and madness. But the fear was so deep-rooted that even after his death, China remained afraid to speak the truth. Mao Zedong left behind the highest death toll caused by a single ruler in the 20th century. His actions claimed the lives of more than 60 million people, by various estimates, all in the name of equality, revolution, and a brighter future. It was only later, under Deng Xiaoping, that China began slowly dismantling Mao's cult. But even today, criticizing Mao remains taboo. In school books, he's the father of the nation. In reality, he was the most devastating executioner in its history. After Mao Zedong's death in 1976, China's political climate remained tense. Power temporarily shifted to his close circle, particularly the so-called Gang of Four, a political faction that upheld the ideas of the Cultural Revolution and attempted to preserve Mao's influence even after his passing. The central figure among them was his last wife, Jiang Qing. However, an internal shift in power soon followed. Deng Xiaoping, who had previously been purged for ideological mistakes, returned to political life. He became the driving force behind the reforms that gradually pushed Maoist dogma out of state policy. In 1978, Deng launched a new direction focused on economic reform and openness to the world. Alongside these changes, the Communist Party cautiously reassessed Mao's legacy. The leadership could not afford to fully denounce him, as that would have undermined the regime's legitimacy. Instead, an official stance was formulated. Mao was a great revolutionary who made serious mistakes in his later years. This approach allowed the state to acknowledge some responsibility without dismantling the cult of personality entirely. In practical terms, this meant that the People's Republic of China never carried out a process of lustration or comprehensive demaoization. Those responsible for mass repression, famine, and torture remained unpunished. Moreover, many cities retained monuments to Mao, and his portrait still hangs prominently in Tiananmen Square. For decades, the Chinese people lived in a state of psychological paralysis. After years of propaganda, denunciations, and public humiliation, society lost its capacity for open critique. Even survivors of the horrors of the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution rarely spoke about their experiences. Mao Zedong's role in history remains a matter of debate. To some, he is a national hero and the founder of modern China. To others, he is the primary culprit of the largest peacetime humanitarian catastrophe. But from the perspective of historical fact, which the historian must not ignore, Mao Zedong led a regime that caused the deaths of tens of millions, destroyed cultural heritage, erased generations of intellectuals, and built a system rooted in fear and violence. After Mao Zedong's rule ended, China was left in a catastrophic state. Tens of millions were dead, the agricultural system had collapsed, mass illiteracy prevailed, and the intellectual environment had been eradicated. The education system was in ruins. During the Cultural Revolution, universities were shut down, teachers persecuted, and academic knowledge labeled as bourgeois. Millions of young people who should have been studying instead participated in political violence. An entire generation was left without basic education. The country's infrastructure was in decay. Instead of real factories, hundreds of thousands of backyard furnaces smelted scrap metal, producing worthless iron. Innovation was replaced with ideological campaigns. Agriculture was disorganized. Collective farms lacked motivation, labor was ineffective, and reports were falsified. Mao's personal life deserves separate mention. According to his personal doctors and former aides, He neglected basic hygiene, rarely brushed his teeth, refused to bathe, and did not treat venereal diseases. Meanwhile, he engaged in frequent sexual activity with many young women, often underage. These encounters were organized by a special internal apparatus that selected partners for him. Mao considered himself beyond moral standards. He believed in his own exceptionalism and denied physical limitations. His doctor, Li Jisue, wrote in his memoirs that Mao believed venereal diseases purified the body and did not require treatment. The elite close to Mao lived in complete privilege. While the people starved, party members received rare food, had access to special hospitals, elite schools, and personal drivers. This contrast between revolutionary rhetoric and actual practice created a hidden class division that was officially denied but governed all of social life. Internationally, Mao was once viewed as an anti-colonial icon by leftist movements in the Third World. But this image quickly eroded. His policies not only alienated the West but also the USSR, especially after the ideological split with Khrushchev in the 1960s. In 1972, Mao surprised the world by welcoming U.S. President Richard Nixon to China. This was not a sign of reconciliation, but a strategic maneuver against the Soviet Union. Domestically, the system was built on lies. Local authorities falsified data to avoid Mao's wrath. Statistics about harvests, steel production, and party membership were routinely inflated. After Mao's death, many documents were destroyed or classified. China's archives remain closed to independent researchers to this day. In modern China, Mao's image is still protected by state censorship. His portrait hangs at the entrance to the Forbidden City. His mausoleum stands in Beijing's Central Square. His face appears on banknotes. At the same time, open criticism of Mao is forbidden, punished by law as disrespecting the revolutionary legacy. The regime has crafted a double image. Publicly, Mao is the founder of modern China. Privately, an unspoken awareness that he was responsible for millions of deaths and delayed the country's progress by at least 30 years. As of today, Mao Zedong's legacy remains deeply controversial and complex. On one hand, his image, quotations, and symbols are still used in the official rhetoric of the People's Republic of China. On the other hand, many of his policies have long been abandoned as harmful and ineffective. The Chinese Communist Party adopted a strategy of selective memory. Mao is remembered as the liberator of China from imperialism, while the facts about mass deaths, famine, torture, and censorship have been concealed or distorted. In school textbooks, he remains a positive hero. Access to archives remains restricted. No investigations into the mass killings have been conducted. The names of those responsible for the repression remain unknown to the public. This was no accident. For a state that relies on centralized ideology, acknowledging the crimes of its great leader would risk political collapse. Instead of reckoning, the country built a system of silence. Even decades later, millions of Chinese citizens who lived under Mao still cannot openly speak about what they endured. Many, witnesses or victims of the Cultural Revolution, grow old in a country where truth remains dangerous. The trauma of society was never addressed. It was buried. Internationally, historians remain divided. Some emphasize Mao's role in unifying China and mobilizing the rural masses. Others point to the undeniable fact: Mao Zedong bears responsibility for the largest peacetime death toll in human history. His rule became a blueprint for how ideology, fused with unchecked power, leads to mass destruction. Terror wasn't an accident of revolution, it was its primary tool. A historian analyzing the 20th century cannot ignore Mao. His legacy is not just tens of millions of corpses, but hundreds of millions of lives broken in silence, beneath the portrait of a leader who demanded blind faith. To the question, who was Mao Zedong? The answer is simple. He was the man who turned revolution into a machine of systematic annihilation. And his shadow still looms over China. One of Mao Zedong's most powerful tools was propaganda. It infiltrated every aspect of life, from children's rhymes to national policy. Every citizen was expected to know Mao's quotes, recite them in public, and use them as arguments in everyday conversation. In schools, lessons began with group readings of the Little Red Book, a compilation of Mao's quotations that became an ideological Bible for the entire population. Students were forced to memorize and recite passages. Refusal could be seen as sabotage. In the arts, only one style was permitted: revolutionary realism. Paintings, songs, theater performances all had to glorify the struggle, the worker, the peasant, and, above all, Mao himself. Artists who strayed from the party line disappeared from public view, were sent to labor camps, or subjected to re-education. In everyday life, Mao's presence was omnipresent. On apartment walls, in medical offices, even in children's journals. People lived in a visual space saturated with images of the leader. This was not a sign of respect, it was an act of survival. Not displaying Mao's portrait at home could arouse suspicion of disloyalty. The Chinese were forced to display artificial unity, though society was paralyzed by fear. There was no safe space for dissent, not even within one's own family. Children reported on parents, husbands on wives, colleagues on each other. Informing became a means of self-preservation and social advancement. Any deviation from the official line could result in a self-criticism session, a public humiliation where a person had to confess to invented crimes. If that wasn't sufficient, they were sent to re-education through labor, forced labor camps, often without rest or food. Youth became the regime's main target. Mao aimed to create a new generation with no memory of the past. Older people who remembered a different China were marginalized or eliminated. Students were taught that loyalty to the party outweighed love for family. Many became Red Guards and participated in physical attacks on teachers, officials, and intellectuals. The psychological trauma caused during this period had no path to healing because the state never admitted guilt. In an environment where any thought could be used as evidence of anti-national behavior, a new personality type emerged, based on silence, fear, and simulated loyalty. This type is a direct result of the Maoist system, which cultivated not thought but survival. One of Mao Zedong's main goals was the complete eradication of religion from Chinese society. Christian churches, Buddhist temples, Muslim mosques, all religious sites were targeted for destruction or converted into warehouses, offices, or revolutionary centers. Clergy were labeled enemies of the people. They were publicly humiliated, forced to renounce their faith, tortured, or executed without trial. Even a simple act like praying before a meal could result in arrest. Monasteries were looted, icons destroyed, and holy books burned. The treatment of Tibetan and Uyghur communities was especially brutal. Their religious leaders were deported or disappeared without a trace. Along with religion, national memory was erased. Over 6,000 historical temples were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution alone. What couldn't be physically erased was symbolically crushed through mockery, coercion, and ideological pressure. Attempts at resistance existed, but they were scattered and uncoordinated. Intellectuals who tried to speak out were eliminated before their ideas could spread. Any protest was labeled counter-revolutionary and violently suppressed. Even silent disagreement was considered guilt. Peasants sometimes sabotaged collectivization by hiding grain or avoiding quotas, but the repression system was so comprehensive that resistance was futile. Fear proved more effective than any legislation. The economic consequences of Mao's rule were devastating. The country lost decades of development. Industry was driven by propaganda, not innovation. Agriculture was in disarray. The currency was devalued. China's technological backwardness became evident compared to Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. After Mao's death, the political elite understood the scale of the disaster but could not openly admit it. A new doctrine was created: 30% mistakes, 70% achievements. This formula allowed the party to retain authority while distancing itself from responsibility. The fact that China has never officially acknowledged the full scale of the tragedy is, in itself, a historical crime. Without investigations, apologies, or compensation for the millions of affected families, the country moves forward under a shadow it refuses to recognize. Mao Zedong is not just a name in a textbook. He is a case study of how one man, armed with an unchecked ideology, can turn an entire nation into a machine of self-destruction. His actions altered the lives of hundreds of millions, cultivated a culture of fear, eradicated dissent, and delayed the nation's progress for generations. The fact remains, Mao Zedong was not the builder of modern China, but its greatest obstacle. Mao Zedong was not merely a political leader, he was a systemic catastrophe for his own country. His revolutionary rhetoric promised equality, progress, and liberation. In reality, China received mass repression, famine, cultural destruction, and tens of millions of deaths. No other 20th century leader created such a vast system of peacetime terror. Mao didn't just suppress opposition, he engineered a society where the mere idea of dissent was treated as a crime. Fear and obedience became the foundation of public life. His ideas proved ineffective, his economic experiments disastrous, and his cult of personality deeply damaging. Under the banner of revolution, he destroyed generations, culture, faith, and human dignity. Despite his official status as the father of the nation, the historical facts remain clear. Mao Zedong is a prime example of how unchecked ideology, fused with a personality cult, leads to mass destruction. A historian examining this era must speak plainly. Mao was not a reformer, but a despot. Not a unifier, but a destroyer. Not a symbol of the future, but the face of a past that must never be repeated.